What's up guys, Lifting here. In this video I'm going to give you a visual representation of the changes that have happened to the passive skill tree in 2.6 for Legacy League. There's a lot of changes, I'll go over all of them, and you will have to listen up because I'll try to do this pretty fast because otherwise it's simply going to take too much time. We're going to start down here by the Duelist, and what has happened here is that instead of only being able to get into the leech nodes from the top of the skill tree, you can now access it via the bottom two, giving you better options for pathing and making it more efficient. So very nice. A similar change has happened over near Thickskin. As most of you guys probably are aware, previously you could only enter Thickskin via the top line. Now you can access it via the bottom line, again giving you better pathing options in the ranger part of the tree, which is something people have been asking for a very long time. It felt terrible before. Next up, the Brutal Blade and Slashing Combat has been combined, and instead of Slashing Combat, one of the notables are now called Fatal Blade. And what has happened here is that they've simply made the nodes and the notables here more efficient, making swords or the sword cluster here more attractive. Before it was lacking a bit and people would, for the most part, skip it. And now for a really interesting change, the Flash Freeze notable, which nobody was really picking up before, now has a second cluster too, and that contains the notable Winter Spirit. Winter Spirit gives you 20% physical damage converted to cold damage, and one of the notables before, I think it's the one right before here, gives you 20% more. So with these two together, you can get a 40% physical converted to cold. And if you, for instance, combine that with something like Ice Shot, which is now a 60% cold majority, you can get 100% cold with this. And this also, all of a sudden, makes it more interesting to pick up Flash Freeze now, whereas before it didn't really seem like it was worth it. So pretty cool. That's a very interesting change here. And then we can see that they have moved Forces of Nature up here between the Shadow and the Ranger, whereas before it was down by the Ranger in the corner here, close to Arrow Dancing. What isn't the same and is actually completely new is the Primeval Force large elemental cluster down here. The notables give you increased elemental damage with weapons, and the notable itself will give you reduced reflected element or elemental damage taken, and you get some elemental resistance penetration and some elemental damage while using a flask. So this is a pretty interesting elemental cluster here, which was added because GGG felt, and I think a lot of people agree with that, there wasn't enough elemental damage scaling down in this part of the tree. Now we have it, and it's actually a pretty powerful cluster. We then see a lot of general changes to some of the specific weapon clusters before. They've made them more efficient. You don't have to spend as many points anymore to get to the notables, and some of these are from the Shadows, the dagger ones. There is also Claws of Pride. These are also now only 3 points, and you have a Master of Force up here, which used to be 4 points. So overall, just an attempt to make these clusters more appealing, which makes good sense. They weren't picked up that often before. And in the same area, they've also increased the accessibility to Void Barrier, the Energy Shield Evasion Hybrid notable, and the Revenge of the Hunted, the physical damage and the maximum life and evasion notes here. And again, this is just to give you more options for branching in, giving you a more efficient skill tree and making it feel overall nicer. And they have removed Master Fletcher. Instead, it is now called Avatar of the Hunt, and the nodes and the notable itself is improved. And then for a change I really like, and I think I'll be using quite a lot, Mind Drinker, the Mana Leech node and Mana node, together with Blood Drinker, the Life and Life Leech node, they now give you attack damage leached as life. Before it was physical attack damage leached as life. So you can now use this with elemental attack skills to potentially opening up a whole host of new possibilities, allowing you to not rely on something like Warlord's Mark for leech or specific unique items. So this is really, really useful. I like this. Then we've seen some general improvements to the entire claw wheel here. What they've done is that they've made the notables more efficient. These are now crit and multiplier nodes, whereas I think before it was attack speed and maybe fizz or some life leech or something like that. And Soul Raker can now leech from non-physical damage too. It still has to be attack damage, but that's pretty awesome too. And Claw of the Magpie have just had its power increase too. So far, just these changes here makes me much more interested in trying out a claw build. I really like what they've done so far here. Then we can see that Night Stalker has been moved down here, and there's no longer an accuracy node that you can pick up before you get to Night Stalker. Then once again, another buff to claws here. We get a higher accuracy roll and just in general higher values of the notables and the nodes before it. And then a change that is somewhat similar in style, at least, to the Flash Freeze cluster we saw down by the Ranger. Arcing Blows and Crackling Speed have been put together in the same cluster, making it, at least if you wanted to pick up all of them before, more point efficient. The numbers themselves are pretty much the same. There's not any major improvements or anything like that. But point for point, if you wanted to get both before, these are now more efficient. And then another very interesting change, Mind Over Matter has been moved, well, to the other side of this intelligence node here, but there is also now 3 nodes behind it, and you get 12% mana, and then a flat 100 plus to maximum mana via inspiration here, and 40% increased maximum mana, leaving you with, well, a ton of scalability here. This is going to be incredibly powerful for anyone using Mind Over Matter, or at least going to make it feel much more natural when you go Mind Over Matter to get a decent amount of mana to run with it. Pretty cool. This may also mean that builds that before were relying on high mana regen and a high mana pool that didn't go Mind Over Matter might be inclined to try and go Mind Over Matter now. So we may see some different defensive options in the future here. And they've also made the explosive impact notable better, first of all, and more efficient. Instead of requiring you to spend 10 points that each gave you 10% increased fire damage before you were able to reach the explosive impact notable itself, you can now just invest 2 points. And one of the notes down here, instead of giving 10% fire damage, it then provides 6% fire damage and 4% increased cast speed with fire skill. So if you want that hybrid node instead, you can do that. And as you guys can see, they've moved Zealot's Oath over here near this part of the tree instead of near Explosive Pact. And well, we'll see how this is going to feel when we create some builds to see if it makes sense to have Zealot's Oath here. Down by the Templar here, we can see that the staff nodes by themselves, they have been improved, and the notables have had their numbers improved. And there is a new notable called Counterweight, 60% increased global critical strike chains while wielding a staff, and then 32 global critical strike multiplier while wielding a staff. And one thing to note here is that this also works even if you're not melee. So you could potentially use this as a spellcaster, but then again, ranging through the nodes to get that, I'm not sure if people would do that, but it's doable at least. Next up, we're seeing an improvement to Razor's Edge. It now gives you +1 to melee weapon and unarmed range, and 30% increased physical damage with swords, and 15% chance to cause bleeding. So overall, it's had its numbers tweaked a bit, but the very nice thing in my opinion is the +1 to melee weapon and unarmed range. And the notable below Blade Master, it has had its numbers tweaked too, and now instead of giving you percent increases to accuracy, it now gives you that flat 200 to accuracy rating with swords, again making it a little easier to scale the flat amount if you have other nodes in the skill tree. Oh, and as you guys probably noticed, the nodes behind the sword notables here, they have been removed. They no longer exist. And then for an elemental cluster that really wasn't used that much before, Ash, Frost, and Storm, it now gives 10% reduced reflected elemental damage taken. And I think I may have forgotten to mention that the Master of Force it now gives 10% reduced reflected physical damage taken too. One thing I do find a little curious though is that Master Force had one of its nodes removed to be more efficient, but Ash, Frost, and Storm, like the elemental version basically of that same cluster, is still 3 nodes here. But we'll see. I guess it's because there's 2 places in the skill tree you can now get reduced elemental damage reflected. Maybe. Then for Blade of Cunning down here, this entire cluster here have just had its number tweaked. Some have been improved to make it a more viable choice. I'm still not that hooked on this cluster, but maybe it will at least make it more interesting for some people now. Hatchet Master has also been improved. Again, this is just the numbers that's been tweaked, making it a more interesting choice to pick up. Prism Weave up here, the wand cluster now gives 30% increased elemental damage with wands. This is up from 20, so a 10% damage buff here. And then a pretty cool change to one of my favorite clusters, but that I never used because it wasn't worth it. The Soul of Steel cluster down here, instead of requiring you to go through 3 armor increase nodes to get to Soul of Steel, you can now get through it with just 2 points, and then the 3rd point will be invested into the notable. And one of them now is a hybrid armor / all elemental resistances. So you can choose that if you prefer that too. So that's pretty cool. Then over by the Ranger again, Celerity, it now has 5% attack and cast speed added to it too. And finally, for the last change to the skill tree, Blast Cascade up here, instead of having 8% chance to gain a power charge when a mine or trap is detonated or triggered, it now has 15% chance. It's a pretty significant increase, but I am not sure this is going to make the difference anyway. This is still gonna feel, in my opinion, a little lackluster if you rely on that mechanic specifically for you to generate your power charges. And that's the current passive skill tree changes, guys. There is quite a lot, and it's pretty obvious that their goal, as they've described in the patch notes here, has been to improve claw and swords and staffs. Primarily one-handed weapons have seen some love too. We've seen some improvements to a lot of the general clusters, making them more efficient. We've seen some nice pathing improvement. And I must say, I'm looking forward to trying to build around the new, more efficient pathing in the Ranger part of the skill tree. And I want to try making something with Mind Over Matter now, because of the very nice notable behind it. We'll see how it feels having Zealot's Oath over there in that position now, but I think it's a good change. But that's what I wanted to show you guys. I know you could read all of this in the patch notes, but I hope this visual indicator makes it a little easier to digest. Subscribe for more Path of Exile content. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?